Hello everyone, let's review the results of the 3-card blind main event tournament that took place this April. This month we had 331 players participate in the event, which is pretty much spot on for the average for 2026 so far. We also had 62 new players try the format for the first time. So if you're a new player watching this video right now, thank you for trying the format and I hope to see you again next month. Among the 331 submissions this month, there were 239 unique decks. And if we weigh the cards in these decks by their performance and run them through the Simpsons Diversity Index, we will see that this month was a decrease in diversity compared to the prior month. But March's main event was one of the most diverse months we've ever seen in the format, so this is a pretty high bar to clear. If we were to compare this month to months in the past year instead, we would see that this month was a hair above the average diversity we see in an event. By far the most notable shakeup for the format coming into April was the fact that Ancient Tomb was unbanned. The Ancient Tomb unban brought with it many decks that weren't possible using Crystal Vein, which was the stand-in while Ancient Tomb was on the banned list. A couple examples include Ancient Tomb, Drillworks Mole, and Sphere of Resistance, and Ancient Tomb, Elixir of Immortality, and the Filigree Silex. This, combined with the fact that many decks that were using Crystal Vein swapped their Crystal Vein for Ancient Tomb, such as Ancient Tomb, Mox Emerald, and Words of Wilding, makes it no surprise at all that Ancient Tomb was the most popular card this month. I believe that its unimpressive average score can overwhelmingly be explained by many players seeing the exciting unban as an opportunity to play some creative but perhaps strategically questionable brews. The second most popular card this month was Crystal Vein, which is interesting because it highlights that for some decks, whether you would want to run Ancient Tomb or Crystal Vein is a meaningful question. A great example is Lodestone Golem in combination with Mana Vault. You can cast your Lodestone Golem on turn 1 with either of these decks, but running Crystal Vein leaves you vulnerable to a card like Tabernacle, and Ancient Tomb will lose you the mirror match because after you've traded off your Lodestone Golem, you will be killed by your own Mana Vault faster than your opponent will because of the life you lost to Ancient Tomb. And related to Crystal Vein, our most popular deck this month was Anvil of Bogarden, Crystal Vein, and Nether Spirit. This was a top deck last month as well, with Anvil of Bogarden only narrowly avoiding being banned. There are plenty of other interesting meta insights to cover, but I think we can sprinkle those in as we review our winners. In Novice 3, our winner was level 420 Dank Meme Wizard, who was playing Ancient Tomb, Elixir of Immortality, and the Filigree Silex. The combination of Elixir of Immortality and the Filigree Silex allows you to retain a cushy life total while you wipe out all of your opponent's non-land permanents, and eventually dome your opponent for 10 over and over until you win the game. In Novice 2, our winner was Dan Eel, who was playing Gleesa Sunslayer, Hickory Woodlot, and Twitching Doll. Twitching Doll is a very powerful 2-drop to cast off of a depletion land in its own right, and Gleesa Sunslayer is an interesting payoff for the extra mana that it provides. Gleesa Sunslayer has a whole lot of text on it, but I suspect that the most relevant text is just that it has First Strike and Death Touch. I'm not anticipating that Gleesa Sunslayer is going to rocket off in terms of popularity, but it sure is a brick wall that is hard for single threat decks to get through. In Novice 1, our winner was Abzan Beast 52, who is playing Chancellor of the Forge, Fury, and Mental Misstep. This deck brings very little to the table in terms of power, but a lot in terms of interaction. I think it is worth mentioning because this deck cannot cast Fury, it is interchangeable with Pyrokinesis, which is relevant because unlike Fury, it can be cast at instant speed, which can catch something like a Blinkmoth Nexus, which will only be a creature during your opponent's turn. That difference doesn't come up that often, and in the context of this pod, it didn't matter at all. In Aspirant 4, our winner was Juggernaut 245, who was playing Hollow Trees, Nissa Ascended Animist, and the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale. I don't think we've gotten to talk about her much, but Nissa is one of the strongest storage land payoffs in the format. You will win most games where she resolves, and the Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale can stall the game long enough for you to slam her on the board and have mana available to pay for your own Tabernacle to keep the Phyrexian Horror tokens alive. In Aspirant 3, we had a tie between Foresee and Hypersonic Walrus. Foresee was playing Botanical Sanctum, Mistbreath Elder, and Spyglass Siren. Spyglass Siren gives you a map token, and map tokens allow creatures to explore. Now, although usually we would think about explore in the context of having a library, in 3-card blind your library is empty. As it turns out, if a creature explores while your library is empty, it just gets a +1/+1 counter anyways. This means that between Mistbreath Elder and Spyglass Siren, you have an unlimited source of maps to continue to grow your creatures at a rapid rate. Hypersonic Walrus was playing Daze, Student of Warfare, and Tundra. Daze and a powerful 1-drop is a classic combination. Even in matches where Daze doesn't give you a free win, it can often disrupt your opponent's game plan enough that it will stall them while Student of Warfare levels up to become an unstoppable threat. In Aspirant 2, our winner was Monster Dog, who was playing Crystal Vein, Lotus Petal, and Magus of the Moon. Interestingly, this edged out an Ancient Tomb Magus of the Moon Mox Ruby deck in the same pod. The match that made the difference was against Desert Mer Servitor. If just one Mer Servitor attacks, of course Magus of the Moon can block and prevent any damage from getting through. This means if the Mer Servitor deck would like to win, it has to attack with both creatures. In this case, the life loss from Ancient Tomb is a make or break difference. That 2 life loss will result in Magus of the Moon losing the race to the 2 Mer Servitors, whereas if Magus of the Moon was cast off Crystal Vein, it can block one of the attacking Mer Servitors and then attack back, threatening to outrace the Mer Servitors and forcing them back onto defense, which will result in the game ending in a tie. In Aspirant 1, we had a tie between Kamatana and N, who were both playing Ancient Tomb, Time Vault, and Voltaic Servant. If your opponent doesn't have a blocker or a way to remove Voltaic Servant, by the time that it hits the board on the second turn of the game, the deck can take an unlimited number of consecutive turns and chip your opponent's life total down in increments of 1 all the way to 0. In Contender 7, we had a 4-way tie. RNG Mancer and Triskaidekaphile were both playing Chancellor of the Forge, Mental Misstep, and Pyrokinesis. This deck dedicates all of its resources to interaction, to pave the way for that little goblin to get through without meeting any resistance. Oruk Soraik was playing Arachne, Psionic Weaver, Holdout Settlement, and Memnite. To be able to cast Arachne on turn 1, you need white mana and a tapped creature. Holdout Settlement is probably a card you haven't seen before, but it does let you meet this condition. Arachne's tax effect can lock many decks out of the game, and between her and Memnite, you have a decent amount of power and toughness on the board even in matches where you can't lock your opponent out. Calendar Days was playing Doomsday Confluence, Subterranean Hangar. It takes this deck 4 turns just to get out a 3/3 with Menace. But for every turn you can stall longer than that, you can ratchet that X value up by 1 to allow Doomsday Confluence to scale into a devastating board wipe win condition combo. In Contender 6, our winner was Zandy W, who is playing Etched Slith, Peat Bog, and Sunset Saboteur. Etched Slith is a scaling evasive threat on its own, and can eat counters off of your opponent's storage lands and depletion lands. The combination with Sunset Saboteur is an interesting one, because Etched Slith lets you turn that drawback that gives your opponent's counters when you attack into an upside when combined with Etched Slith's ability to take your opponent's counters and make them your own. In Contender 5, our winner was Techo CN, who was playing Ancient Tomb, Big Mother Mouser, and Mana Vault. Big Mother Mouser is an all-in threat that scales rapidly and comes complete with a built-in backup plan in the event that your opponent has removal. In Contender 4, we had a tie between Bardic Rogue and Majin Buu 22, who were both playing Anvil of Bogarden, Crystal Vein, and Nether Spirit. As mentioned earlier in the video, this was the most popular deck this month, and its ability to simultaneously attack your opponent's hand while putting out a nearly invincible 2/2 makes it one of the top decks in the format right now. In Contender 3, our winner was Grapeshot 420, who was playing Dismember, Hammerheim, and Heartfire Hero. The combination of Hammerheim and Heartfire Hero is potentially the strongest 1-drop in the format, but it's held back by the fact that Hammerheim only produces red mana. This severely limits the options that the deck has available for its third card, but Dismember is powerful removal that hits most creatures in the format. In Contender 2, our winner was Die Please Thanks, who was playing Dryad Arbor, Force of Vigor, and Mistbreath Elder. This is a really cool fringe deck that has existed for a long time, but this is the first time we're seeing it win a pod. The combination of Mistbreath Elder and Dryad Arbor is a 2-card package that gets you a scaling 1-drop, because Dryad Arbor can be both your mana source as well as a creature to return to your hand for Mistbreath Elder. You can of course pitch to cast Force of Vigor on turn 1 by throwing away your Mistbreath Elder, but if you can afford to wait a little bit longer, Dryad Arbor is actually green. Unlike a basic forest which is colorless, Dryad Arbor has a color indicator on it that lets us know that it is green in all zones. In Contender 1, we had a tie between Mage of Ith and Random Pachi. Mage of Ith was playing Haywire Might, Pendelhaven, and Thalid, and Random Pachi was playing Nature's Claim, Pendelhaven, and Thalid. These decks are both trying to do the same thing, which is leverage that combination of Pendelhaven and Thalid to simultaneously be able to be aggressive early as well as scale into the late game. Both of these decks came prepared to deal with artifacts and enchantments, but in slightly different ways. Haywire Might of course can be used as a creature itself and is a valid target for Pendelhaven, but it can only target non-creature artifacts and enchantments, which in the context of this pod changes the outcome against something like Phyrexian Dreadnought. Across the whole pod though, everything evened out for these cards to be equally effective, and in Exemplar we had a tie between Cosmic 345 and Epsilon greater than 0, who were both playing Lush Grove, Pendelhaven, and Thalid. Compared to Seize Claim, Lush Grove allows your opponent to tap for 3 different kinds of mana, but it still does remove all of the other characteristics from any land it enchants, and can be used to bait out your opponent's daze by threatening to remove their ability to use the alternative casting cost on it. Although Thalid is a bit of a meme in the community at this point, it is unironically one of the most powerful cards in the format right now because of its combination with Pendelhaven. This is also the second month in a row that our reigning champion has chosen to submit this deck, demonstrating how powerful it's been across multiple metas. And speaking of our reigning champion, Epsilon greater than 0 has now been champion for 4 months in a row, which is tied for the community record. Congratulations to Epsilon greater than 0 for continuing to be champion once again with a whopping 1893 ELO rating. And with that, I'd like to congratulate our winners one more time before we move on to discussing the outcomes of this month's community ban vote. This month, as a community, you voted on Ancient Tomb plus 5 additional cards to determine whether they would be added to the ban list or remain legal. And to dive straight into things, Ancient Tomb and Daze will remain legal, and Thalid, Anvil of Bogarden, Tomb of Arami, and Fury are being added to the ban list. Let's start by discussing Ancient Tomb. We will always allow the community to vote on recently unbanned cards, so Ancient Tomb was going to be part of this list no matter what, but it was also the most popular card this month by far. It is responsible for enabling some powerful decks, some of which won pods this month. That being said, the card supports a diverse cast of decks, didn't have a particularly impressive average score, and I think many players are just still excited to play with the card after it had been unavailable for so long. Although it wasn't voted on as favorably as Ancient Tomb, Daze is also sticking around in the format. It continues to put up an impressive average score and is a great disruptive option for many one-drop decks. I think one of the reasons players have given this card a little more leniency might be because it has some clear weaknesses that can be played around. Although there are many 3-card blind decks that bring absolutely no mana to spare, there are plenty that do, so players have no shortage of options to consider if they do not want to lose to Daze. The first card among those that were banned is Thalid, and there was a strong consensus among players that this card needed to go. Its combination with Pendelhaven has been absolutely dominant, especially at higher levels of play. With Thalid out of the picture, players now have the opportunity to experiment with other Pendelhaven options, or experiment with Utopia Mycon as a Thalid alternative that can't leverage Pendelhaven as effectively, but because of that, there's less of a trade-off to explore running a dual land to experiment with non-green pairings. Anvil of Bogarden was the most negatively voted on card this month. I think when we voted on this card last month, many players were willing to let it slide, perhaps thinking that the strength of the deck was just a nuance of that particular meta. Fast forward to today, and you will see that Anvil of Bogarden, Crystal Vein, and Nether Spirit was the most popular deck this month, growing in popularity and average score compared to the prior month. With Anvil of Bogarden out of the picture, slower decks don't have to worry about their hands being gobbled up before they get to do anything. Tomb of Arami had a moment in the spotlight a year ago when it was a Champions winning deck. The card is unique in that it is a payoff for a storage land, but also generates mana itself, allowing you to play disruptive effects on the first turn of the game. These strategies never truly left the meta, and were creeping up in popularity and effectiveness, especially at the highest elos of play. Bottomless Vault, Ruthless Negotiation, and Tomb of Arami was tied as the third most popular deck this month, with the popularity of the deck increasing as you move up pods by elo rating. With the card added to the ban list, we may see top players reevaluate which decks they consider to be the strongest. And finally we have Fury, which the community was split on, and it really only got banned by a narrow margin. The card was a critical part of the Chancellor of the Forge Dwarven Hold Fury deck, which was tied as the third most popular this month. The combination of Chancellor of the Forge and Fury is at least part of the reason that Chancellor of the Forge was banned back in October of 2024. Both Fury and Pyrokinesis decks performed very well this month, but by banning Fury instead of Chancellor of the Forge, we will be exploring for the first time a meta that allows Pyrokinesis to be used with Chancellor of the Forge in its purely disruptive shell, without Fury in the same meta acting as a disruptive deck that can also scale into the late game with massive threat payoffs. And before we wrap up here, we have to cover the outcome of the unban vote that supporters of this community have the privilege of participating in. And among all of the cards that were eligible to be unbanned, Boseiju has been removed from the banned list. The last time that Boseiju Who Endures was legal was back in September of 2024. The dominant deck that put this card on the ban list was Boseiju, Mishra's Factory, and Mox Emerald. Since then, both Mishra's Factory and Mutavault have been banned, leaving Blinkmoth Nexus as the card that can fill in the gap that these banned manlands left behind. Although Blinkmoth Nexus is considerably weaker in terms of how much damage it pushes as well as how effectively it can block, the strength of Boseiju has always been to avoid direct creature confrontation and remove your opponent's ability to play the game by taking out their land. It's going to be really interesting to see if Boseiju Who Endures can live up to the hype of being a card that has been banned for well over a year. And before we wrap up here, I wanted to remind everyone that submissions for the main event will be open beginning on the 1st of the month and running through the 7th of the month. And May will be the first month where cards from Secrets of Strixhaven are legal to play in the format. Between the new cards and ban list updates, brewers have a lot to consider moving into the next month. I'm excited to see all of the new decks that people come up with. Thanks for watching everyone, and see you soon.